Bobby. Bobby. Am I good to, oh. Oh, yo, okay. There we go, my goat just arrived. All right, cool. All right. You got here just in time, Avik. So it's 6:30, so welcome to an intro to designing for the internet. Let's put this in presentation mode. That'll be a little nicer. My name is Ben. I've been a sheller here for the past 4 years. Crazy, I'm old, Unk status. A senior now. I joined when I was a freshman, and I'm self-taught in design and web development, completely pretty much. So this is gonna be very informal and just kind of, my thoughts and little suggestions to get you started, getting a little bit more confident, going from absolutely never doing this before to just having some self-confidence there. And I'm currently lead designer at Learn Prompting. And I got to that role just by basically doing what I'm going to show you here, just like building up the basics and self-teaching myself. You'll learn the most from just like trying things and playing around yourself and like making your own designs. So I want to, at the end, have a little chance for you to do that. But let's get started. I like this quote a lot. So Maya Angelou said, I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And I think that's very much at the core of design. It kind of, you have this hard tech, and your goal with design is to make it approachable and look credible for people coming into, using a product. A lot of times, especially in startups, really good design can just increase the credibility. It can make it go from something that looks like a team of 2 people is building it to a team. It can make it look like a team of 1,000 people is building it just from a clean design, and that can lead to a lot more growth and revenue. So I think design is very much about making a product feel nice, easy to use, and credible. So let's start here with some very basic fundamentals, and we'll start with color. So why do we like color? Obviously, because it's very cute, but it also has a lot of meanings. So if you are deciding on a color scheme for your product or for a design, it's really helpful to think about what colors represent. These have all been kind of scientifically proven through psychology studies as to what people associate colors to be. So for example, red is excitement and strength and love. Also hunger, so you'll see a lot of food companies be red, like McDonald's or KFC. Blue is a lot of trust and peace, so a lot of like banks will be blue, PayPal's blue. So you want to have or if you're doing a financial company, blue is very common. Green is nature and healing, so a lot of nature startups will do that. Yellow is very energetic. Purple is for royalty, and you can kind of see these more. If you're interested in any specific color, you can look these up, and they're very well researched, and it's super interesting. So that's a good place to start. Colors can really, lead to that feeling that we talked about in the beginning. And so another thing that color is useful for is adding excitement and emphasis to your design. Obviously, if your design is just black and white, it can be a little bit boring. Color is a great way to spice it up, add some excitement, and also put some emphasis on certain things that you want people's eyes to go to, because they'll go to the most interesting thing on the screen. But it can also go a little bit overboard, especially with a lot of colors. So it doesn't mean all color is bad. You just want to learn how to use it properly. So the first rule for color is that moderation is key. So you can start with just a white background or a black background. That's a really easy way to start. You can start with one color, let's just say red here, and use that in other places, to highlight things in text, add button colors. It's very simple, looks pretty nice, a little bit boring, but not too bad. You can increase the number of colors. 2 is about where I would stop in terms of the amount of color you want to have for a project. It adds some, depth and differentiality. It can, make your design look a little bit more interesting, but once you start going a little bit more to 3 colors, it gets a little chaotic, and then 4 is just way too much. So I think in general, I suggest between 2 and 3 colors as a main color set for whatever you're trying to design, whether it's a company and you're trying to choose colors for your brand, or just a general design of a poster or something. Keep it really simple. A great way to choose colors is through color schemes. So monochromatic is where you choose colors that are all kind of the same, same hue of this one color. So it'd be like a light red, a dark red, all very in line with each other. Analogous is choosing colors that are really close to each other on the color wheel. So orange and yellow is a good example of that, or blue and green. Complementary is choosing colors that are on opposite sides to create that contrast. Triadic is the same thing as complementary, except for on all 3 sides of the color wheel, which is really interesting. And you can see there's just a lot of different color schemes. So these are really interesting to look at. You can go to websites like Color Hunt as well for different cool ideas on colors. There's a lot of websites that give you cool potential color schemes that people make just for fun. And the next thing is how to scale colors. So a lot of times, especially if you're using a monochromatic color scheme, which ends up being the case a lot of times because you'll have like a design, generally like, for example, my work at Learn Prompting, we use a green as our main color. And so I make that green kind of work in a lot of different cases. So I need to scale it to have different values because I want 80% of the color on the site to be green. So this is one way to scale color. You just kind of like make it darker. So this starts with choosing that red on the very far this side and then going and making it darker as you go. But this looks a little bit unnatural. So this, I think the second one looks a little bit more natural. And this is just a simple way you can scale colors to make them look natural. And basically the way you do this is a little bit technical, but I thought it was a nice little tip, is if you have your main color here and you want to make it a darker version, you kind of go towards this way on the color wheel. So you go from red to blue in this way. And you can also decrease this increases saturation and also increases darkness. And when you do that, it kind of makes a more natural gradient approach if you're trying to choose analogous colors. And then another easier way, if this is too complicated for you, is just to use opacity. So this is just this color, but in little less opacity, so it's a little bit more transparent. And it ends up looking pretty nice. This is a really common way to just choose just a set of colors to start with your design. And this is the most important thing that if you take anything away from this shell talk, I think this is the most important thing, visual hierarchy. This is core to what it is, I think, being a UI designer and visual designer as well. It's kind of designing for what people focus on first. So let's start. So the three general things that I think are super easy to start with in terms of visual hierarchy are color, font weight, and size. So just to start with color, I'm assuming a lot of you looked at the very bottom here, even though you normally read text from top to bottom. And why would you look there? And it's because the color is a lot stronger. So your eye is very drawn to like the super high saturation and deep colors. So basically, I can control where you look based on just the color that I choose for this text. And that's super important to recognize. And you can use that in your design. If you want someone to look at a certain piece of text on your screen or a certain button, you can use that. You can make that a really bright color or make it very stand out, and that'll make people's eye go to that thing. And that's basically the whole point of visual hierarchy, is to make things you want to stand out, and the stuff that you want to kind of hide or not be as prominent, also hide that. And so with font weight, another example of this, you might have looked at the bottom again because it's the most strong font weight. So it's another good way to just increase visual hierarchy. And then size, again, for the final time, is another way to make something pop. So these are just like a few tools in your toolkit to help emphasize what you want to in your designs. And another thing you can do is mix these a lot of times. Like that's what I do a lot of times, is mix them. So you can see at the top, I used a different font weight, and I also chose a different size for both of these texts. And there's also a different color. So this is a thicker font weight. This is thinner. This is bigger, this is a smaller, and then this is a gray while this is black. And that makes it look really naturally it just makes it look really natural. So that's a good way to if you're trying to do header and then subtitle, this is generally a good rule of thumb. And a few tips with this is moderation again. This is a lot, obviously, there's so many things going on, it's hard for you to know what's going on or what's supposed to be important here. Even if you organize it like this, it's just a lot of things going on. So try and keep this in moderation. Kind of choose one thing that you want to focus on, like maybe color or font weight. Another way to scale text properly is the power rule. So if you want to set up a system for bigger text and smaller text and have these kind of varying text sizes on your designs, whether it be website or a poster or something as well, you can scale your text down by the powers of the number 2. So this is 64-point font, this is 32, and then it goes down to 16 and 8, and you can kind of use this as a really good way of just creating kind of a exponentially increasing font size, which helps differentiate your text really well. And another alternative to this, if you want to have a lot of different options, is scaling by multiples of the number 8. It does essentially the same thing, just a little bit, gives you a little bit more variation, a little more option in terms of font sizes. And then again, we can make this even like look nicer by implying just the font weight that I described before. So now this is the most font weight and this is the least, and it just looks really naturally like it's getting smaller, almost like it's getting further away from you. So that's a nice way you can, again, combine these components of visual hierarchy to emphasize the things that you want and have different variations of text for your website. Now onto spacing. If you haven't been able to tell by now, it's okay to have space. I really like having space. I think it adds a lot of like breathability to your designs. If there's too much on the screen, it gets a little bit overwhelming. So I think it's really important to have space. And one system that you can do for this, there's also a lot of different ways you can apply space, but is just generally grids. A lot of times, especially in graphic design, you'll see grids like this being used. And it's just a really simple way of aligning your text. So for example, on the right side, you see a lot of different like components. There's like text up here, there's this text, there's text down here. These are all different sizes. You can see they kind of do the same scaling by the powers of 2, with this being the biggest thing. This is what your eyes are focused on the most. And then this is supposed to be, kind of what you're focused on the least. Same thing up here. And this is like your secondary most important thing because it's the second biggest. It also, again, is a little bit less font weight. So you can see how they apply those rules from before. But somehow, when you look at this, it looks like it's all put together and it looks very nice, even though there's all these components all over the screen. And it's because behind the scenes, there's this grid that aligns everything and makes everything look super nice and polished. So if you're kind of struggling with your design having a lot of different complexity or a lot of different components you want to add, and you don't really know how to make it look naturally nice, grids are perfect for that because you can kind of see how just a simple grid can make something look really, really nice without you having to try super hard. And there's a lot of these different types of grids. You can look online. There's a ton of different like grids you can use. This is one that I thought was kind of cool. And you can see they get very complex. They start getting really complicated the more you go into it. But that's the beauty of it. It can be as simple or as complex as you want. So I urge you to explore with like little grids that you can make and try and align things in different ways and see what you can make. It's a lot of fun. And this is just another example. If you're doing like a website, this is a very bad example of a website, but very simple. You can have your header, some paragraph text, a button, and these you generally want to have like equal spacing. So here there's like one little margin of space here, same space here, and there's a little bit more here to differentiate it a little bit. But then if I wanted to have another section underneath this, I would keep this margin the same for text and images, just kind of keeping things consistent in that way. So that moves on to composition. So there's a lot of different ways to compose your website and choose how you like organize your content. I think the best thing for this is just to go to Google. You can surf it. There's a lot of great things online. These are 5 of my, I guess I kind of curated this last night. There's a lot of places that you can find designs, but these are a great place to start. You can take a picture of this if you're curious and want to look at it later. But these are all just websites that kind of have curations of different designs. So if you're curious, if you have an idea like, okay, I want to make a landing page, but I want to know what kind of landing pages look good or what draws my eye the most, these have a bunch of examples of those. And one thing I will note on this, and I'll come back to this later, but references are super useful and super important. You shouldn't ever feel like you're stealing from anyone because you aren't. You should use references at all times that you can. I have a friend in New York who works at like a design agency, and they work for huge clients like Calvin Klein, Ferrari, these huge companies, and he still like abides by references. He uses references all the time. It's super useful. Don't feel like you're stealing. Use references a lot. It'll really help you. And I'll go back again to this later in the slide or in the slideshow. But when you look at a lot of references, what happens for me is it's almost like you are your own like generative AI. You kind of like absorb all this content in your head, and then you kind of find what you like and naturally subconsciously. And then when you make your design, it's like almost you're the only one that could really do it because you're kind of absorbing all this content, and then you're finding what you like. And you create something that truly is unique, even though you are kind of absorbing this and using these references. So again, really highly recommend. Look on websites, see what you like, and then combine it to make something beautiful in the end. So for general landing pages or e-commerce stores, there's generally like there's formats for this. So this is like kind of what a lot of e-commerce websites look like. So let's just say I wanted to go and I was doing an e-commerce website. I would go to one of these 5 places, and I'd probably see stuff like this, examples. And then I can just see, what I like about this, what do I don't, or what do I not like. Maybe I like this heading section, but my products, I want to have I want to have more products here. So then I would look again for a place that has more products displayed, and then I can combine that with what I liked about up here, and then kind of make your own design from like composing all these different elements of things that you like. Another common design is for like a dashboard. And these designs, each of these have like their unique advantages. This is very different than a dashboard, and some of the examples of why it's very different is like a side navigation. This has no real navigation. There's like a nav bar at the top that most likely links to other pages, but it doesn't really change the content on like your screen. So this is mostly for like people scrolling and just getting a quick view of their website, but this is better for kind of like having a lot of information and data that you want to display. So it has side navigation, datas and graphs for dashboard applications, and also like this is a lot more designed for frequent and daily use than this design. This is again like more just scrolly and kind of it links you to different places on a website, versus this has kind of everything you want in like one little space. You can see a lot of it, and it encourages you to like it encourages like you to use this and get comfortable with it every day and get used to this dashboard. So I think it's good to know like there's different different types of compositions that are commonly used for different purposes, and there's reasons for that, and you can kind of intuitively get to the reasons for that by just playing around with it and like seeing what you like and what you don't like. And this is just another example of again what you'd see on these websites. Just gives you a lot of different ideas for what you can do. Another thing is that you might think that when you're designing, especially for the web, that you should be designing for a full screen like desktop, but in reality, mobile phones and tablets are taking over, and it's kind of insane. So 6% of web traffic in 2011 was on mobile or tablet devices, and in 2025, I just looked this up yesterday, it's 62%. So more than half of all of your traffic will most likely be on a phone, especially if you're marketing on like Instagram or TikTok. Most people are obviously gonna like land on your website on like their phone. So it's super important to design nice things for mobile. And a lot of people abide by like designing for mobile first and then expanding it to the desktop. You can do that if you want, but I think just keep this in mind, because a lot of times you might forget if you're tunnel visioned on like a website, but mobile is super important, if not more important than your desktop design. Another thing to note about this is if you're doing if you're trying to make a website for an enterprise, like a company that works with like big businesses, like maybe your desktop will be more important because most people will be going to it like on their work laptop or their desktop from their work, and not like finding it on social media. Just depends on your use case. If you're trying to make like a viral app and you're marketing on TikTok, probably want to focus on like mobile designs. And then another thing is just understanding who you're designing for. So one super simple example that I like to use to get this point across is just a simple way of like how we read. When you read English, you read it like to the right and down. But if you're reading Arabic, it's actually to like the left and down. So this may seem like a super simple like thing, but what it causes is a lot of websites, if they're designed for Arabic-speaking countries, they'd actually design the components to be starting at the left and going this way. So for English, your eyes will start up here generally, and you'll like scan content this way. If you look at heat maps of where people look, it's always super highly concentrated here, and this is like the least concentrated area for visual, like where people look. It's usually like kind of something like this with a triangle being up here. Like this is the most active visual, like where people's eyes go, and this is the least. But for Arabic-speaking countries, it's up here, and so that's why they design it this way with the big text or the big component here as what you're most supposed to look at here, and then it kind of goes and dwindles off as you go this way. And again, you can see visual hierarchy being used here, with this being the most important headline, this being the most important section, and these kind of being less important or like subsections. And you can see this on like Gmail's website as well. Everything's going this way. Just something simple and interesting to think about. And then lastly, consistency. This is more if you're trying to build like a super big brand. This kind of goes into like design systems and brand guidelines, but you can look a lot of this up. There's a ton of cool brand guidelines online. You can see how people like develop these brand guidelines, but in general, you want to be very consistent with the types of text you choose, like the typography you choose, the colors you choose, sizing of elements, and stuff like that. You can even get into like, if you're doing, for my work, I have been making a design system for learn prompting, and so I create little what the designs of like each button will look like on the site, and I put them in a document. So then when we're making a new page for the site, we just take those buttons that I've already designed, and it makes everything look super consistent, so people don't get confused as to why maybe one part of your site doesn't look like another part of your site. This is a lot more important if you're trying to build like a huge brand with a lot of different arms in different directions or different pages. If you're just doing a simple like poster, you don't really need this as much, but it's super cool. And the number one thing I would suggest for this is like the Olympic brand guidelines. You can just look up Olympic brand guidelines online and find it. It's super sick. It's awesome. It's super in depth. It has all the things you would want to look at, and it's like visually really cool. The Olympics do a really good job. I was gonna put the link up there for you so you could see it, but that's what it looks like. Not very fun. So if you just like look up Olympic brand guidelines, you'll find it. But I'd suggest this if you're interested at all in kind of brand guidelines or like design systems. This is a great example of it. And then this is just an example of like what I did for learn prompting in the same kind of way. So I basically like looked at the Olympic brand guidelines and was like, okay, what is like super important for us? Like these are like primary colors with like hex codes and like RGB values. This is some extended color I did. Just some of the type I chose, like the font, like what font weight we wanted to have, what font sizes. And then same thing for components. I kind of just made components here and like what they would look like and then how we could put them on the site. As you can see, again, the visual hierarchy is super important. Like you can see how like these are the headers that I wanted to have. I scale them kind of nicely with like powers of 8, and same thing with the paragraph text. So just all those little elements combining to make something that looks pretty nice and clean. And the last thing, I want to just go over this really briefly because I don't want to make this super long-winded. UI UX design process. It gets really complicated. If you have questions about this or are curious about this at all, come to me afterwards. After this, I'm just going to be sitting around, and I'm going to let you guys have a chance to design something if you want. And I'll answer questions from anyone if you have any questions. But if you're curious about this, please come to me afterwards. I'd love to talk to you about it, but it gets very complicated, and I want to save you all the time of my yapping about it. So the most important things to take note of for UI UX design process, I would say, are like empathizing with your users and testing and getting feedback. So you want to just know, again, like I've been saying throughout this talk, you kind of want to know who you're designing for. It really, really does help, and it's super important to know who is using your product to make it cater to them. Similar to like the Arabic example, like if you're making a website for an Arabic-speaking country or population, you want to take that into note and put everything important on the left side so they can start. It's just more natural for them. So in that same way, knowing your customers, whether they're older, younger, what kind of professions they use. Maybe if they're a DJ or like a person that uses music software, you'd want to look at what music software looks like and then design your designs based on what music software looks like, so it's more comfortable for them. Just things like that. And then testing, you want to just ask, get feedback from people. So go talk to your users and say, do you like this? What do you not like about this? There's lots of cool softwares you can use to collect analytics. You can also, there's software that you can use, you can download, and it will literally show you like where people like click on your website and like how they scroll. So it's kind of crazy. It's like super Big Brother moment. It's kind of scary, but you can see like how people are using your website directly, and that can be good for like learning what people like struggle with, what people don't struggle with, and then just asking people, like talking to people, especially when you're starting out. Just talking to people is the best thing. And so for the final little thing here is just my advice that no one asked for. Starting out is like only use white or black-ish backgrounds. Asterisks there because a lot of times it looks a little nicer to have off-white or off-black backgrounds, like a little bit gray or a little bit, tan or white. But in general, if you're just trying to start out and you don't want to get too complicated, just start with a white or black background. Color backgrounds can work, but it takes a little bit of a finesse, a nice little touch there to make it like super nice, and it's pretty complicated. So I usually also steer away from color backgrounds. So just start with this, and then only have white text in colored sections. So this looks generally really nice. These do not. So in general, I think it's really hard to have like even like black text on like a colored background unless the colored background is super light. It just doesn't look good. So in general, what I suggest is you have like a dark enough color that like there's a good contrast for your buttons or whatever, and then you put like white text on top of it, so it just stands out. It looks really nice, and you avoid all of this. And it just simplifies your life a little bit because it's really hard to make text on a colored background look good unless it's white and kind of highly saturated for the background. Another thing that a lot of beginner designers, including myself, really fall into is like making things look really big. especially if you use like Figma or some design software. When you're designing on Figma, like let's just say this is your like laptop screen. When you're designing on Figma, you'll like make a desktop and it'll be kind of like inside here, right? So you can like move around it and like see what's going on. But since the desktop you're designing on your laptop is not as big as your full screen, you end up thinking you need to make elements like a lot bigger because you're working on like a smaller canvas. And then when you go to translate those designs into like code or something, it just looks like kind of whack and it like makes everything look really expanded. And I think one of the biggest things for me that I've noticed is I can tell a website is like amateurly designed if things are super big. So I, in general, think like bigger is not better, and actually smaller is usually a lot better for these kinds of things. So this is like an example of like my first website that I ever made, and you can see I kind of went large here. I have a big text here. This button is pretty massive, hard to miss. And I also decided to have a background that was a full image, which was very bold of me, and I don't know. I think it looks okay, but definitely doesn't give me much versatility on what I can do with this intro page. And then here again, like huge buttons, like big text. It looks just really unprofessional, in my opinion. Like, I don't know what we were doing there, but then like this is like my revamped like personal site, my second design for it. And you can see I kind of like cleaned things up a little bit. I made the text a lot smaller. This is like a little phone that you could like interact with, but basically just, I think this looks a lot cleaner, a lot nicer, a lot more professional. And the main difference is really just like text sizes and sizes of things in general. And you can even see like I use the grid. I almost have these like grid lines here to make it seem like I use the grid as well. And then this is another design I did a while back. Very similar, obviously, but you can just see how like the sizing of things. I made this button really small, and I kind of in general like the smaller stuff looks a lot better. It kind of fills up the screen a lot better. So I think that's something that people fall into. Don't try and avoid this and lean more towards this. And then the last thing, which I talked about before, was don't reinvent the wheel. Steal from the greats. I am a master of this. I love doing this. And so if you're interested in design and you decided to come to this talk, I assume maybe you've seen some cool websites that really caught your attention. You're like, oh, this is a sick website. I really love this. Like something about it I just really like. Take note of those and like really like appreciate those and like notice the little things you like. And then you can kind of design them based off this. If you didn't notice, Stripe has these little like dotted lines. We see that again in my personal site. You see these little like these things here. These had like a nice little arrow buttons, and I used them kind of there. I thought I used them up here. I used them up there before, but I found stuff that I liked on these websites, and I used them in other things. But there's just so many great websites on the internet to look at, and it's like not at all a bad thing to steal. Again, references are super important. So for example, this is a design I also did way back in the day. It was for the same project that I did this design for. And I was trying to make like a little header section for, it was a marketplace, so I wanted to have like an ID for someone, like an @ and then their name, a profile picture, a profile banner, some socials, and then just like a header there. And so I didn't know, before I ended up with this design, I didn't really know how to design that. So what did I do? I decided to look around. So to start out with, I really liked how this had like a curved banner design. I thought that was interesting. A lot of times banners are like the full length of the screen. So I thought this was kind of nice. So I decided to implement that. And then on this website, I liked, I think it was the placement of the profile picture. Instead of being in the center, I liked it kind of being off center. So I applied that. And then here, I liked how they did their socials right below the banner. I thought that was really nice and intuitive. So I put those there. And then lastly, I kind of liked the way that Clubhouse has like these off-circle, kind of oblong shapes for their profile pictures. I thought it made it a little bit more interesting. So then I did that for the profile picture. And so you can see how all these little things that I liked from all these websites combined to something that hasn't existed before and looks really cool. And so I think that's what I'd urge you to do for all your designs, is just look around, see what you like, take note of it, like be very specific about what you really like, and then combine them into something that looks really nice. So you don't have to come up with this all by yourself. It helps a lot to like look at references. And trial and error is super helpful. This is again another like example of me going through trial and errors. I was trying to make like a little card to display like an NFT. And so these are just like some examples that I went through. But just generally just trial and error. Like, I started with this and I wanted to add like a little collection icon. So I was like, how can I do that? So I put it in the corner and you just kind of like iterate through it. I liked how this was like almost a deconstructed card, where normally cards are a full rectangle, but this time it was kind of like you have your image here and then your price here, and they're connected, and you can still tell that they're connected because it's all one card, but it looks a little bit more interesting. So in general, just try a lot of things out. If you look at my Figma files, it's a lot of just like copy pasted things along the way, and it's just like little changes, like the smallest changes each way, and then I kind of like see and compare them, like what do I like, what do I not like, and then eventually you end up with like something that you're really happy with. So just copy paste, try new things, test things out, trial and error. And then the final and most important rule, drum roll please, break the rules. Don't listen to me and have some fun and just go and do whatever you like. I think that's the most important thing. Like, you really are doing a disservice to the design and to your prospective users of your design if you're not doing something that you genuinely like and think is good. So break the rules, make something you like, and get designing. So this is where I will open it up to any questions. I think it's better if I just like sit over there and then anyone who's interested just like comes over, because I know it might be like intimidating to like ask a question in front of a bunch of people. And so you can just come and like talk to me. I'll talk to you about anything. And it would be nice if you have anything that you were thinking about designing before. If you had any like, coming into this, like something you wanted to design, maybe try and like use the little hints and tricks that I gave you here and just get a little like started with it, just like whip something up, and I can come over and just like check it out, give you some hints and tricks and say, give you some feedback or whatever. So that's the talk. Thanks for coming, guys. Yes. Yes, Arden.
Do you keep up with like design trends or like different things that are happening in the world and incorporate that, or is it mostly just your own design system that you have here?
Yeah, like for design trends, it's mostly like Twitter. Like I follow a bunch of people that are designing on Twitter, and then I just scroll through my feed and get like the coolest shit ever, just like one after the next. Like, so I think but that's also just like the same way I would also go on like Dribble or like all those the things that I said over here. Very similar. Just you go to these websites and they have a lot of like the most popular things that are going on at the moment. In UI UX design, I think it's a lot of like bento boxes and stuff, if you've seen that. I don't keep in track. I think honestly, like the trends, I think like from a high level, if I see something that's like pretty popular on Twitter and I think it's cool, like that's great. But I think it kind of, if you keep on top of the trends too much and you like look into it too much, it kind of overrides your own like intuition and like creative, your own thoughts, I guess. Like, so I don't feel like a super strong need to do that. I just kind of like see what I like on Twitter, and a lot of it's like the trends that are currently happening, and then apply those. But yeah. Oh, Viraj, he's got a question back there. 2 minimalist and minimalist? Yeah. I like that question. I struggle with that every day. That's like the story of my life. I think in general, like, I think it does come with like a lot of intuition. Like you'll like look at a bunch of websites and you'll see what you like and what you don't like. For me, it's like if I see my website that I'm making and it just looks really boring, I'm like, okay, I need to like add something else here. That's kind of what I've been struggling with, like with some of my designs recently. So I think it's a lot of like intuition, and then if you get feedback, again, like you can show people it and be like, hey, is this boring, or like what, is this missing something? If it is, then just keep scrolling, like learn, like look at more references, find stuff that like is interesting to you, and try and apply it. I think that's generally like my rule for it. But in general, I think simplicity is better than overcomplicating things. So I would err towards simplicity. Andrew. Okay, typefaces, I think, so generally, if you're trying to, I think in general, you should choose one typeface for your entire like company. And for me, it's all intuition, but for you, if it's a tech company, generally you'd want to do like a sans serif font, which is like no like curly edges and stuff. There's a lot of those, like a very common one is just Inter or something. You've probably heard of that.
I just meant like what process could you go through?
I go on Google Fonts and just scroll until something like works. If you have for me, like if I have a header of something on my website and I want to say like for example, learn prompting, we're saying like there's $500,000 worth of prizes. I type that into Google. I didn't do it this time because I just have it in Figma. In Figma you can just scroll through the fonts and like see what they look like immediately. But if you were on Google Fonts, you just type that in, and it'll like you can scroll through the fonts and see what it looks like in every font. And since that's like the first impression, I think if it looks good with that, then I'm like, okay, and then I see if it works with like the other text on the site, and if it does, I'm like, all right, sweet, it looks great. But it's a lot of like intuition for me personally, because I see like if it looks good or not. And it should also, again, tie to like the style of the site. So learn prompting is very like, techie and like edgy, so it's very more technical fonts. Like I wouldn't use like Times New Roman obviously there. So just like knowing that. But yeah, Amrit.
Do you use like specific libraries or anything like for like CSS?
Yeah, okay. If you are technical and you want to like develop your designs in the front end, I very highly recommend Tailwind CSS over like every other CSS library. That's because I personally self-learned CSS, so I didn't like use a library to begin with, and because of that, I like know a lot about like just raw CSS. And Tailwind CSS tells you like exactly what CSS is being applied with each class, which Bootstrap and other things don't, and it infuriates me to no end because I can't use Bootstrap because I don't know like the atomic level of like what's getting applied, so it gets really annoying. Tailwind's super simple in that way, and it's also really easy to use. So I'd recommend Tailwind for all the nerds who want to develop their designs. You have a question here?
Question and possible follow-up.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on the user-way accessibility widget on websites? It's like that little circle in the corner.
Yeah.
Like you can help you like increase the text or the
Yeah.
contrast or anything.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think for me, like I should have probably talked more about accessibility in this. I think for me, it's definitely a lot more of an afterthought than it should be, but I think it's amazing. There's a lot of research on accessibility for UX, UI designs. If you're interested in that, just look up like accessibility UX research.
Yeah,
And
that's what I do.
oh, awesome. Okay, yeah,
Or not research, like
yeah,
stuff, yeah.
that's sweet. Yeah. Do you have a follow up for the question? Or sorry for
Oh,
interrupting.
no, because you just have a lot more like design and computer knowledge than I do. So
Oh.
like, in the accessibility space, like I wonder like if widgets like that are preferred, or if you feel like it messes with the design, and you like to rather manually like put in all of those types of things, or like especially like some of the designs we have, like how would I like it would take me a couple minutes to figure out like how I would put alt text for that in a way that captures the like how cool the design is. But I don't know, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think widgets like that are super amazing. And I think a good balance is like having it, like you said, as a widget, where if you need the accessibility and it's like very helpful for you, you can go in, and then that's obviously more important than it looking good. Just being able to get all the content and like be accessible to like, the product that's being offered. So I for sure like agree with that. And I think widgets are a great way of doing that because it does keep the designer's original like vision preserved until someone goes to that. And then again, with the visual hierarchy thing, like making it like visually prominent enough for people to find it who have accessibility issues, but also not in a place that's like super, prominent that maybe make people like overwhelmed with all the options. So up in the top is a nice place again, and then it could have like a little special color to, again, increase that like visual hierarchy to make people's eyes go to it who are in need of that. And I think that's like, yeah. So widgets are great, accessibility widgets. Yep.
What are some of your favorite products to use?
Let me think. I like, obviously these are some of my older favorite websites. Like here, here, I think, like Stripe. This is Cosmos, and this guy was like an independent designer. In general, I'm trying to think. I don't really have any off the top of my head. I think a lot of currently my design stuff that like comes to mind is just Twitter. I follow a lot of designers on Twitter, and it just, I think seeing their like it's more micro, I guess, than a full like macro like website design and stuff. I don't know. I have to think about that. I'll think about that and I'll come back to you with a better answer. But any other questions? If not, thanks for coming. Feel free to stay in and work on the design. I'll be around here. And if you have any other like specific questions about design, I'm more than happy to answer those. So, yeah. Thanks, guys. Also, I'll do a little self-promo, shameless. If you want to increase your creativity, you're like doing a design, you're like, oh, dude, I don't feel creative enough. I want to be more creative. I'm building an app called Easel with my friends, and we help you have little daily creativity moments. So I'll leave that up if you're curious about Easel. So.